Hi, Julie.
Julie? Oh, wow. Hello there. Felt that all the way down into my feet.
Woo! Lovely.
That was nice. How are you today?
I am well. I am well. The sun has been shining. Allergies are a little out of control, but the sun's out. How about you?
Yeah, we are coming out of a 3-day snowstorm,
Wow.
which it's been a long time since this area of the Verde Valley has had that kind of snowfall.
Hmm.
Another hour and a half, 2 hours north of us, Flagstaff is used to getting that kind of snow. But yeah, people are trying to figure out how to drive. My attitude is just stay home. There's no place to be. There's no place to go. Maybe you need to go to the grocery store, but really, really.
Well, I wonder if this staying home has allowed you to go down the poet hole.
Oh, it's so I just love the hunt. I love discovering poets that maybe I haven't known before, rediscovering poets I've long forgotten, people who are poets that I never even knew they were poets. I just like the whole process. But interestingly enough, I decided to go a little bit of a different direction today for us today because I just sort of had forgotten that back in more like around Thanksgiving, November, I discovered the writings of John Muir, who is a 19th century Scottish American naturalist. I don't know if you're familiar with Muir Woods,
Hmm.
which is in Northern California. It's a national monument that Theodore Roosevelt, when he was president, actually created as a natural monument in honor of the work that John Muir did as a naturalist. Um, he, I was totally intrigued by this journal that I had discovered of his and his writings because his writings are so poetic. And so I found myself reading his journal entries from a visit that he made to California's Sierra Nevada mountain range back in 1864. Yeah. Um, and I'd read the dates and then his entry for that day when he took this summer excursion to explore that region. And I found myself commenting to myself on each of these entries in his journal. And then I found myself naturally just writing my journal entry in like a call and response sort of
Hmm.
format. And so that sent me on the journey to know a little bit more about him. Now I've visited Muir Woods. I don't know if you've ever been there.
Mm-mm.
It's in the Mill Valley area, which is north of San Francisco.
Okay.
And it's a beautiful, intimate little redwood forest preserve area. Um, it's been overused in these last couple of years. So I understand under the whole COVID response, they shut it down and was no longer open to the public while they were also letting things sort of heal and recover.
Mhm.
So that's just a little side note. But he was an incredibly influential naturalist, writer, um, sort of, gosh, I mean, I don't really know as much about how he got the training that he got. I know he did go to college in Wisconsin, but don't know for how long. He worked in many different trades. He didn't come from money, so he wasn't a well endowed financial sort of patron of the natural world. He worked in many different industries and really was a self made. Eventually, after a dozen years of working hard in, I think it was something related to growing food, um, he eventually accumulated the kind of wealth that allowed him to be able to take several months and
Mhm.
travel to an area and do a deep dive and really discover what he could discover about that area. And so, he is responsible for the creation of the national park system. He's one of the founders of how to do that right. And that doesn't mean you create a natural park system and then allow industry to come in and benefit from the goodies that are available in that area, which made him a little controversial in the day because that's not how industrialists saw the natural world. And so he was not without controversy in the day. I wondered so much about his journey as a young boy coming from Scotland to Wisconsin in the United States, where his family were farmers. And I wondered if that experience of growing up for as many years as he did in Scotland had something to do with his appreciation of the natural world. I don't know if you've visited Scotland, um, but the first time I visited Scotland, it was like all my sensory was in total overload because of the
Mhm.
beauty. Just the beauty in the natural world was fabulous. So I sort of had this probably 4 hours one evening where I spent a date night with John Muir reading this journal that he gifted us all with, that, you know, was published some, 20 years later as a book. But it was this very intimate experience of him in the natural world, just putting into words as best he could the explosion of beauty and sort of joy and experience that he was experiencing, and it flows like poetry.
Hmm.
So I am going to read his entries, and I've only picked out a few to read, but I'm going to read them as he wrote them, and then my response right after, and then I'll read the next one, and
This
then my
sounds
response.
lovely.
And yeah, we'll just sort of see how that flows, see what you think
Okay.
as we get to the end. So his journal is titled "My First Summer in the Sierra," and it was actually 1869 is the year that he traveled to this region and lived very simply on the land while he was exploring what there was to see. And it starts with a dedication, because he's the founder of the Sierra Club. That's another sideline about him. And so the book was published as a fundraiser to go towards the Sierra Club.
Sure.
And so I wrote, you know, one of the things on the Sierra Club website was that they are faithful defenders of the people's playground,
Mm.
people's playgrounds. And so my response to that was, and so we find the original source of a shift of perspective from we are nature to Nature is ours to play in. So we'll begin with his entry, June 5th, Horseshoe Bend, the Merced River. The evening of this charmed day is cool, calm, and cloudless, and full of a kind of lightning I have never seen before. White, glowing, cloud shaped masses down among the trees and bushes like quick throbbing fireflies in the Wisconsin meadows rather than the so called wildfire. The spreading hairs of the horses' tails and sparks from our blankets show how highly charged the air is. And I respond, imagine the splendor and awe of the 1869 summer evening. Muir noting the lightning among the trees, static sparking his bedding, the high Sierras rolling out her welcome. June 10th, very warm. We get water for the camp from a rock basin at the foot of a picturesque cascading reach of the river, where it is well stirred and made lively without being beaten into dusty foam. The rock here is black, metamorphic slate, worn into smooth knobs in the stream channels, contrasting with the fine gray and white cascading water as it glides and glances and falls in a lace-like sheet and braided over folding currents. Tufts of sedge growing on the rock knobs that rise above the surface produce a charming effect. The long elastic leaves arching over in every direction, the tips of the longest drooping into the current, which dividing against and projecting against rocks makes still finer lines, uniting with the sedges to see how beautiful the happy stream can be made. And I respond, heat unlike anything Muir would experience in Scotland. And how did he compare the highlands to the Sierras? Ancient metamorphic slate conducting water. Was water viewed as a precious resource then? Could Muir imagine our abuses, our manipulation of water 151 years to his California summer? July 1st. Summer is ripe. Flocks of seeds are already out of their cups and pods, seeking their predestined places. Some will strike root and grow up beside their parents, others flying on the wings of the wind far from them, among strangers. Most of the young birds are full feathered and out of their nests, though still looked after by both father and mother, protected and fed, and to some extent educated. How beautiful the home life of birds. No wonder we all love them. Seed, and my response, seed is abundant for birds to eat and wild winds to scatter for future summer harvest. Young birds protected and fed by mother and father, no more. Bird populations have plummeted for the past 5 decades, dropping by nearly 3 billion across North America. The warblers, the wrens, mountain bluebirds, and chickadees once lived in an abundant paradise, now spotted as rare sightings.
Mm.
August 27. Crystals grow in marvelous beauty and perfection of form these still nights, everyone built as carefully as the grandest, holiest temple as if planned to endure forever. Contemplating the lace like fabric of streams outspread over the mountains, we are reminded that everything is flowing, going somewhere. Animals and so called lifeless rocks, as well as water. Thus, the snow flows fast or slow in grand, beauty making glaciers and avalanches. And my response: crystals honored as holy temples. Will mankind allow them to live forever or figure out how to extract every last essence and leave behind ruin? We have destroyed glaciers, manipulated water's natural flow, and now set our sights on manipulating space and the great stars beyond. Why are we so quick to move away from our love of nature to our need to get all we can out of nature? The heartbeat of the natural world is our own. Listen. September 22nd. Here ends my forever memorable first High Sierra excursion. I have crossed the range of light, surely the brightest and best of all the Lord has built. And rejoicing in its glory, I gladly, gratefully, hopefully pray I may see it again. My response: Muir had magical glasses and could see this land as it deserves to be seen. He crossed the range of light and rejoiced in its glory, with high hopes to return again and again. Would he return today, knowing its wild nature has been tamed, abused, left degraded? His High Sierra, first, is his alone.
Mm. Mm. Julie, how lovely hearing his words and hearing your felt responses. I think he would be considered an eco-spiritualist in our times. And his journal entries and seeing things for the first time and you thinking about them 150 years later, it made me think of this book I'm reading, If Women Rose Rooted. And she just posited this idea: if people who were making decisions about our land could think beyond our lifetime, instead of just thinking, oh, how will doing something to the land make my lifetime easier, to think about how will doing this to the land affect 150 years from now.
Right.
So I was thinking about this as you were reading his journal 150 or so years later, and you could see what we have done to our lands.
I feel like, especially as we've moved through the historical times we're finding ourselves in here in our country, where we have such division, we have such push and pull, we have such polarity in just looking at down the middle of the number of people who voted for this last election, and it's divided fairly equally of for and against, good and bad, right and wrong, just sort of the polarity. And yet, what we know is you can't have light without dark. You can't, it's very wrong thinking to have, this is good and that is bad. That takes you into a dead end, that takes you into a very limited space to dwell in. And so what I found was happening as I was reading about John Muir is I was so entranced by his discovery and his wanting to share this, his just being, totally um, enchanted by the lands that he was walking and what he was discovering, and at what cost.
Right.
Because it then made me think, well, who were the people who were in this region, the First Nation people in this area? And I did a little search, and it was the Coast Miwok people were in this region. And just as was happening all along the West, and especially the West Coast of the United States, Spanish missionaries were arriving, 40, 60 years before, John Muir makes his journey to this region. But in comes all this European sort of influence, all these people into this region, and they wipe out an entire First Nation of people. 90% of the Coast Miwok Nation was killed by disease just 20 years before John Muir makes his journey to this area. And I wonder, was he sensitive to that? Did people talk about that? Is that just the white male privilege experience in steroids happening that we all kind of know about and have benefited from, experience, lived? And out of that, this terrible thing that happens, this man brought so much beauty and protection to the natural world. He's responsible for being an amazing conservationist who recognized these lands need to be protected for future generations, for everyone to enjoy, and they need to not be destroyed by man. And so I that contrast, that push pull, good bad, that sort of just really was swirling around me. His romantic notions of what he was experiencing, and then flash forward today, what would he think about these amazing birds that he was like totally entranced by, and realized that our bird population is in serious trouble? What would you think about how water has been degraded to the point that it's now toxic in many, many places? So yeah, I was really intrigued by sort of the dichotomy, the push pull, negative, positive, the romanticism and the reality, sort of all of that. And, John Muir has, he is known for so many beautiful quotes about the natural world. I don't know if you are familiar with "The Mountains Are Calling and I Must Go." Famous quote that is a John Muir quote. Of all the paths you take in life, make sure a few of them are in dirt. I like that. So yeah, I wanted to share that experience with you.
There's so much here, Julie. There is the conservation piece of the land and the birds and the water. Um, and there is the piece of 20 years before, when white man began to settle this area and what happened to the native population that had inhabited for hundreds and hundreds of years. And, how was that thought about? Not how did they talk about it, but how did people think and feel about this? And it kind of parallels, um, what began to happen, to the land itself. Not only were the people run over, but the land, began to be run over as well.
You know, a population, First Nation population that understood do nothing to the land, which could
Mhm.
affect future generations.
Right.
Always be aware to take what you need and never take the first one you see. Be sure there's a second, third, or fourth so that you protect. Um, and interestingly enough, I wanted to know, okay, so how did Muir Woods as a national monument sort of come about? And so I went on that hunt to find out a little bit more about that. And so, I read that Theodore Roosevelt goes ahead and signs that into, you know, a law to turn this into a national monument. But the land has to be actually donated. And so the land is donated by a man by the name of William Kent, who was also a conservationist, comes from some money, and he's also known as an anti-immigrant politician. So
Huh.
that sort of like, that's sort of like, that's interesting. This is a man who authored the law founding the national park system in the United States. That's an amazing 1916, sort of an amazing program to have had that sort of thought and stewardship, and to be able to get people to vote in favor of it, to have that sort of influence. He also supported the 19th Amendment, which was the women's right to vote, and was very active in furthering that effort. And here's the
Mhm.
anti-Chinese, anti-Japanese immigrant, and worked very hard within the federal government to make sure that he was pushing together um, laws that would keep Chinese Americans and Japanese Americans from being able to own land. So again, here we come back to the land, this like, who decides who is worthy stewards of the land?
And who decides whose land it
Who
is?
decides whose land it is? It was just these amazing things that were done. And there's this contrast
Mhm.
from that fascinating. So I think about, at the time, the influx of Chinese immigrants, Japanese immigrants to the West Coast in particular of this country that, you know, came for a better life, came because of conflict happening within their countries, came to build the railroads that connected the west and the east of the United States. A massive undertaking, only to be, um, treated the way they were treated.
Mhm.
It's just that polarity is just something I'm fascinated by. How really good things can be birthed, and really crummy things are right on the other end of that balance. And how do you find
How do you find?
yeah, the right balance of that. How do
Mhm.
how do we as human beings have the arrogance to think we know what that is, what that
Right.
is? It's just an interesting topic. So yeah, John Muir is one of the people I would want at my imaginary dinner party. I would want John Muir sitting next to me because I have some questions.
Well, I'm going to just throw this challenge out that you and he have a conversation, and maybe you can bring it to us at another airing of poetry and sound if you were to have a conversation with him, or maybe do some more research with some questions in mind and see if he, can answer some of your questions in his other writings.
I really do want to explore more about him because he definitely stands out as someone who was navigating the times
Mm-hmm.
and is not thought of as a political person,
Mm-hmm.
and is thought very much as a self-made person. And I'd like to know what that really, like, what does that really mean?
Right. Right. Well, maybe we'll have a part two.
Maybe. Stay tuned.
Well, Julie, thank you so much. This was lovely and enlightening, and I'm leaving with more questions.
That's how I know it's been a good filling experience.
Yes.
So
Well,
happy
thank you
to
for
hear
that.
that. All
Yay.
right, friend. Until
Okay.
next time.
Until next time, have a great time.
Okay, take care.